Welcome to the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm Dr. Terry Schrader. With me today is Dr. Allan Brandt, Professor of History of Medicine at Harvard Medical School and author of a perspective article, FDA Regulation of Tobacco, Pitfalls and Possibilities, published in the July 31st, 2008 issue of the New England Journal of Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Brandt.
Thank you.
Why do we need FDA regulation of tobacco?
Tobacco is the most dangerous product legally sold in the United States. We've known for more than 50 years that it's a major cause of death and disease, and it's virtually unregulated in an economy that's become highly regulated. We regulate pharmaceuticals, we regulate food, we regulate the environment, and somehow, and we can explain the reasons, tobacco has eluded serious federal regulation.
What would the advantages be of the FDA regulating tobacco?
There are potentially very significant public health advantages because the proposed bill before Congress now would help to limit access among youth, which is one of the principal causes of the development of nicotine addiction and tobacco use. It would much better label cigarettes so that consumers would be apprised of the very serious harms and ultimately death that tobacco causes. It would, for the first time, give us an idea of what's really in cigarettes, the additives that companies put in that they've never been forced to list before. If you put an additive in a food product, you have to identify what you're putting in it, but tobacco has always been outside the aegis of our typical regulatory policy, and it would bring tobacco into that in a way that's both in terms of science and public health.
Why are some prominent anti-tobacco figures against this bill?
Well, I think it's not that surprising, really, because our history of attempts to regulate the tobacco industry, to be perfectly honest, have often, to some degree, backfired. So the first major piece of tobacco legislation in 1965, after the Surgeon General had issued his first major report on smoking and its links to lung disease and cancer. In that first legislation, they put a label on cigarettes that said, "Caution, cigarette smoking may be hazardous to your health." We now know that the companies actually, in many ways, wanted that kind of a label, because then when individuals sued the companies, they could say, "You were forewarned." So what appeared to be a public health intervention, labeling cigarettes, really turned out to be advantageous to the companies in terms of their longer strategy. And this was often true of many kinds of regulatory initiatives that it would at least appear the companies opposed, but then worked in their interest.
What would FDA regulation mean in specifics in terms of the production of cigarettes?
There are several key provisions to the bill. Among them are very much focused on youth marketing and access. You can't give away small packs of free cigarettes, which is one of the ways that the companies have promoted smoking among kids. All of us have been in drugstores and grocery stores where we see the prominent advertising at checkout for tobacco products. All of that would now need to be in black and white, which is shown to be less aggressively and successful in terms of marketing. This would require the companies to report all the additives, all the ways they treat tobacco papers. So these are really key provisions that would then give the FDA the authority to order the companies to remove any aspect that can be demonstrated as increasing the harmful quality of tobacco. The bill even gives the FDA authority to reduce significantly nicotine content, which could make cigarettes considerably less addictive and therefore help some people who want to quit. But it would regulate other aspects as well. One of the things the bill does is it bans fruit flavorings, which have recently been added to cigarettes to help promote tobacco with kids. One of the things the bill doesn't do is require, at this time, the elimination of menthol. But if FDA scientists begin to identify menthol as a harmful aspect of smoking, then the FDA would have authority to begin to take menthol out. The elimination of menthol probably wouldn't have permitted this bill to proceed so far as it has. That said, I think menthol is a critical issue. It needs to be investigated. Menthol cigarettes are especially popular among African Americans, so there's been a lot of appropriate concern in the African American community about what this bill says to African American citizens.
Where will the money come from to help pay for FDA regulation of tobacco, given that the FDA is already well underfunded?
There is a shrewd notion in the bill that the companies would actually have to pay for this regulatory process through what they're calling users' fees, or a tax on the companies that would go directly to the FDA for the purpose of regulating cigarettes. And it would be established by the market share that the different companies actually have of the US market.
Is there any concern that the regulations would actually be weaker because the tobacco companies are paying for them?
Well, I think there are these kinds of concerns, and what this really would require, and this is always an issue in regulatory authority, is an aggressive, independent FDA that really takes its public health mission seriously, and an FDA that's free of influence from the companies that it regulates. So these issues are not exclusive to tobacco.
How has the tobacco industry manipulated the public, the government, and even medical science?
They really invented political lobbying as we know it. They were tremendously influential in Congress, and it made it enormously difficult to pass the kind of legislation that's proposed now. But not only did they manipulate the political system, they manipulated science. They paid for a lot of science that had nothing to do with really determining whether smoking was harmful or not. All the while, they were doing research in their own laboratories, which led them to understand the intensively addictive characteristics of nicotine. So it really is a sordid story. Even today, more people are dying of tobacco-related diseases, even as we've seen these substantial reductions in smoking, than HIV, suicide, alcohol, illicit drugs combined. Add in diabetes, still 430,000 people every year in the United States die from tobacco-related diseases, and the costs to our economy are close to $100 billion a year.
Does the FDA have the will to regulate cigarettes?
To be perfectly honest, we can't completely know the answer to that question now. But what I think is there is a vigilant and aggressive tobacco control community now, which really didn't exist in the mid-20th century. And so I think there will be tremendous public health scrutiny if we do have FDA regulation. And if it's simply serving the interests of the tobacco industry, there will be many people coming forward to discuss both how to modify the legislation or how to change it. Because the expectation really will be, and it will put the FDA under a great deal of scrutiny, that their actions have to reduce the significant burden of disease associated with this product. And that will be the ultimate test of FDA regulation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brandt.
Thank you.